A shivering bear pleads with a man to come inside. The man's reaction is unexpected. During a bitterly cold winter evening, nestled deep within the woods, a solitary man is startled by a strange noise at his doorstep. Upon opening the door, instead of a lost dog or a wandering traveler, he is met by the sight of a bear. Not merely an ordinary bear, but one ravaged by the tempest, its coat encased in frost, eyes filled with a desperate plea. Confronted with a wild creature seeking aid, what would be your choice? Would you shut the door, or would you dare to invite it inside? This narrative transcends mere survival. It delves into themes of trust, bond, and the serendipitous moments life presents us, often disguised in fur and claws. The wind screamed through the dense spruce and fir trees in the valley, twisting their icy branches into grotesque forms. Snowflakes, like frozen secrets, swirled against the log walls of Vincent Stone's cabin. Inside, the soft light from a cast-iron wood stove threw dancing shadows across the room. Vincent was nestled in an aged leather chair, with his well-worn Nikon D850 camera lying on the table next to him. This camera had been his bridge to the world since he had secluded himself here, nearly 2 years earlier, capturing the wild grace of this secluded Montana area near Glacier National Park. The cabin's walls were hung with images of elk in the morning fog, a bald eagle gliding above Lake McDonald, and a ridge dusted with snow shimmering under a weak winter sun. Yet, despite these comforting scenes, an unsettling silence filled the cabin tonight, a silence that weighed heavily on his chest, a constant reminder of everything he had lost. Suddenly, a loud snap of ice breaking outside jerked him to alertness. He turned toward the frosty window. Shadows morphed and moved in the faint light, the towering trees swaying with the wind. Then, a sound broke through, a deep, mournful groan, similar to a dog's whimper, but richer in tone. Vincent's heart raced. It was unusual for any living thing to come this near to his refuge. The closest road was 5 miles out, and the local wildlife typically steered clear of human spaces in the colder months. With caution, he approached the window, his breath clouding the glass as he strained to see through the snowy blanket that enveloped everything. At first, there was only the vast, unbroken white of winter, like a shroud laid over the land. Then, something stirred. A large, dark shape loomed close, hunched near his porch. The creature before him was indeed a bear, but not the robust, regal type he had photographed in the lush summer, confidently roaming the forests. This bear appeared thin, its fur matted with ice, emitting faint wisps of steam from its nostrils as it breathed heavily, its front paw awkwardly pressed into the snow. "No, Jesus," Vincent murmured to himself. His thoughts raced. It was a grizzly, Ursus arctos horribilis, both admired and feared locally. Typically, these bears avoided human contact, especially during hibernation. However, the desperation in this bear's demeanor was palpable. Desperation could signal danger. He fetched his flashlight from the kitchen counter, turned it on, and cracked the door open. An icy gust struck his face as he peeked outside. The bear barely reacted to the beam of light, only shifting slightly to lock eyes with him. Its eyes, deep amber and filled with weariness, held a look of intense vulnerability. "Are you hurt?" Vincent quietly asked, half expecting the bear to respond. The bear responded with a low rumble, sounding more like a pained moan than a growl. It lifted its injured paw and limped a step closer, its large body sagging. Every instinct screamed at Vincent to shut the door, to secure himself from this formidable beast, but the bear's labored breathing and deliberate movements halted him. This was not aggression. It was an appeal for help. All right," he said softly, more to calm himself than to communicate with the bear. Clutching a thick wool blanket, he stepped cautiously onto the porch, his boots crunching against the snow. He paused just feet from the bear, which stood trembling. Up close, the severity of its condition was heartbreakingly clear. Its coat was thin, its ribs starkly outlined under the skin, and frost adorned its whiskers like miniature icicles. "Let's have a look," whispered Vincent, his tone even and calm. The bear adjusted itself, lowering its head in a sort of surrender. It was then that Vincent spotted the severe cut on its paw, with the flesh appearing raw and edged in black, signs of frostbite setting in. "Oh, you poor creature," he murmured, his voice breaking as he draped the blanket over the bear's back. The bear barely moved, merely twitching as the blanket's warmth met its frozen coat. Carefully, Vincent led the bear into the cabin. As they entered, the warmth from the wood stove enveloped the bear, which then sank heavily onto the floor, breathing heavily yet steadily. Vincent stood motionless, his hand clenching the table's edge for support. There, a grizzly bear lay just feet away inside his cabin. Despite the bizarre reality, fear was absent, replaced by a profound sense of compassion. Vincent pulled a first aid kit and a jar of honey, genuine Montana clover honey he had picked up at a roadside stand months earlier, from a cabinet. He placed the jar near the bear, doubtful it could eat given its state. To his astonishment, the bear's nose quivered, and it managed to lap at the honey, its tongue sweeping over the edge of the jar. "There you go," Vincent whispered softly. "You're going to be okay. We'll sort this out together." He sank to the floor next to the bear, overwhelmed by fatigue. Yet, for the first time since that fateful accident, this wasn't the oppressive, burdensome tiredness he was accustomed to. It was a fatigue filled with purpose, momentarily reigniting a spark of life within him. Outside, the wind continued to scream, but inside, the gentle crackling of the fire and the bear's strained breathing were the only sounds. For the first time in a long while, Vincent felt he wasn't completely alone. Dawn arrived slowly, casting a pale gray light through the frost-lined windows. Outside, the storm had draped a new layer of snow, pristine and unbroken except for a rugged line of paw prints leading to the porch. Inside, the glow from the wood stove bathed the walls in a subtle golden light, yet it did little to alleviate the cold seeping into Vincent's bones. He had spent the night in his leather chair, half asleep, always listening to the faint noises of his unexpected companion. The bear sprawled across the cabin floor, its breathing uneven, the blanket Vincent had covered it with now wet, the melted snow dampening the rough fabric. The animal shifted, its amber eyes slowly opening, weary but clearer than the night before. Vincent moved closer, his actions measured and careful. "Hey there," he murmured, keeping a cautious distance as he crouched down. "Looks like you survived the night." The bear blinked, watching him as he fetched the first aid kit from the counter. Vincent's hands shook a bit as he sifted through its contents. Antiseptic wipes, bandages, a tube of antibiotic ointment. These items were designed for human injuries, yet they were all he had to offer. "I'm here to help," he whispered, partly to reassure himself as much as the bear. "Just try not to bite, all right?" The bear's injured paw lay awkwardly before him, the severe gash contrasting sharply with its light fur. Vincent kneeled down, setting the first aid kit next to him, and took a deep breath to steady himself. The air was thick, filled with a tentative trust that hung precariously in the balance. Gently, he touched the paw. The bear twitched and let out a low growl but did not pull away. "Easy," Vincent soothed, his voice a soft murmur. "I know this hurts. Just stay still for me." He started to clean the wound, and the bear hissed in pain as the antiseptic wipe made contact. Vincent's face mirrored the bear's discomfort, his heart heavy with empathy. The cut was severe, more so than he had first thought, with frostbite nibbling at the edges, blackening the tissue. He carefully applied the ointment and then wrapped the paw in gauze, fashioning it into a rudimentary bandage. "There," he announced, leaning back. "It's not perfect, but it should help for now." The bear raised its head, its gaze meeting his with a depth that tightened Vincent's chest. It wasn't gratitude in the human sense, but something was there, an inkling of mutual recognition that left Vincent breathless for a moment. Vincent stood and made his way to the kitchen, searching the cabinets for anything suitable for the bear to eat. he came across a can of salmon, its label faded but readable, and opened it with a handheld can opener. The sharp, metallic sound cut through the cabin's silence, catching the bear's attention. He placed the can a few feet away on the floor and stepped back to give the animal some room. The bear sniffed cautiously, then slowly pulled itself toward the food. It ate with deliberate, weary movements. As the bear consumed the salmon, Vincent leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, watching quietly. His mind buzzed with questions. Why had the bear sought him out? How did it know he would help? What desperation had driven it here? Though the storm had passed, the forest around the cabin lay eerily silent, a quiet so deep it seemed the very world was pausing, holding its breath. Vincent's eyes wandered to the window, taking in the snow-blanketed landscape that stretched out, untouched and solitary. He had chosen this isolated life, a refuge from the world's clamor and his inner turmoil. Yet the presence of this wounded bear on his floor now bridged a gap he hadn't realized was there. Its arrival seemed to shift something deep inside him, awakening feelings he had long suppressed, connecting him to the world in ways he hadn't anticipated. Once the salmon was gone, the bear laid its head down, its breathing evening out into a calm, regular pace. Vincent cautiously approached, picking up the empty can and disposing of it in the sink. A slight smile crossed his face as he observed the giant creature sprawled across the floor, resembling an oversized dog. "You're a fighter, huh?" he commented, a note of respect in his voice. "Seems like that makes two of us." The day unfolded in a tapestry of serene moments. Vincent kept busy with mundane chores, stoking the fire, sweeping the floor, and whipping up a simple breakfast of oatmeal and instant coffee. Throughout, his eyes periodically drifted towards the bear, which lay mostly immobile, conserving its strength for recovery. By midday, the sun pierced the cloud cover, casting weak, silvery rays across the snowy landscape. Vincent stepped outside to check on his generator, the crisp air nipping at his cheeks as he waded through snowdrifts. The forest seemed unusually silent, devoid of the typical chirping of birds or the whisper of swaying branches. Upon returning, he found the bear alert, its gaze fixed on the door. Vincent paused, noting the intention in its posture. "What's going on?" he queried, shutting the door behind him. The bear shifted its gaze towards him briefly, then back to the door, its nostrils flaring as if detecting a scent. Vincent's brow furrowed, his heartbeat accelerating. "Are you trying to tell me something?" he asked. The bear exhaled a soft grunt, a sound that was neither threatening nor dismissive. As Vincent drew nearer, a rush of possibilities flooded his mind. He was beginning to realize that whatever reasons had led the bear to his cabin might still be unfolding. As the sun lowered, stretching shadows across the snowy terrain, Vincent paced near the window, his eyes occasionally flicking to the bear. Its intense gaze stayed locked on the door, emanating a silent urgency that filled the cabin. "What's out there?" Vincent whispered to himself, not expecting any reply. He massaged his temples, his breath visible in the chilly cabin air. He had spent much of the afternoon puzzling over the bear's actions, yet each reflection brought him back to the same conclusion. The bear was waiting for something, or someone. The bear shifted its hefty paw, the sound scraping against the floor as it struggled to stand. Vincent instinctively stepped forward, his hands raised as if to support the large animal, though the bear seemed oblivious to his presence, focused solely on the door. It managed an unsteady step forward, then paused, turning to look at Vincent with what appeared to be a plea in its eyes. "You want me to follow you, don't you?" Vincent murmured, his voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and caution. The bear grumbled softly, a sound that was persistent but not menacing. It nudged its nose towards the door once more, then looked back at Vincent. The message was unmistakable. The outside air was piercingly cold, the kind that immediately bit into any exposed skin. Within moments, Vincent had tightened his heavy parka around himself, the faux fur of the hood brushing against his cheeks for added warmth. His boots made a distinct crunching sound as they pressed into the thick snow, following the bear whose movements were now surprisingly steady, showing none of the weakness it had displayed earlier. Around them, the landscape was a vast expanse of white, punctuated only by the dark shapes of spruce and pine trees. The forest felt alive in its stark quiet, with the occasional creak of tree limbs heavy with snow breaking the profound silence. The sky above was painted in fading strokes of lavender and rose, signaling the swift departure of daylight. Vincent maintained a safe distance from the bear, his gaze alternating between the animal's injured paw and the path they tread. The snow beneath them narrated their journey, a singular trail of deep paw prints now accompanied by Vincent's smaller, more tentative boot marks. Abruptly, the bear halted, its ears perking up. Vincent froze as well, his breath catching in his chest. He listened intently, but only the soft whisper of the wind rustling through the trees reached his ears. The bear cocked its head, attuned to sounds beyond Vincent's perception, then continued its measured trek. "Where are you taking me?" Vincent whispered into the biting wind, his words dissipating almost as soon as they left his mouth. They arrived at a narrow ridge, where the forest's dense trees gave way to reveal a steep descent into a shallow ravine. The snow was banked high at the edges, forming delicate overhangs that looked as though they might crumble at any moment. The bear paused at the brink, its nose brushing the snow as it scented the ground. Vincent edged closer, his heart racing. "Easy now," he called out, his voice firm even as his chest constricted with apprehension. "I'm right here." The bear twisted its head around, its amber eyes catching the last rays of light. It issued a sound that was part growl, part sigh, and lumbered onto the snowy slope, its hurt paw plunging deeply. Vincent paused. The slope was perilous, capable of snapping bones if a false step led to a tumble. However, the bear seemed undeterred. It continued on, its large body driven by a blend of resolve and urgency. As Vincent followed, his boots skidded on the icy ground, making him cling to low branches for stability. The descent was gradual and meticulous, every move a challenge to maintain equilibrium and determination. The frigid air whipped through his lungs and his fingers numbed inside their thick gloves, straining as they clutched the coarse bark. At last, they arrived at the base of the ravine. The bear halted, lifting its head to scent the air once more. It issued a soft grunt and moved towards a dark figure half hidden by the snow, a craggy rock protrusion that emerged from the ground like the backbone of a prehistoric creature. Vincent squinted. The rock formation was more than a mere natural oddity. It concealed a cave, its entrance veiled by snowdrifts and fallen limbs. "You led me here for this?" Vincent murmured, his voice hushed. Naturally, the bear did not reply, but its actions were more telling than any words. It hobbled towards the cave, stopping at its mouth to look back at him. The look in its eyes now was unmistakable, imploring, desperate, almost human-like in its depth. Vincent paused at the entrance. The cave gaped wide, its darkness unwelcoming. He clumsily activated his flashlight, its light cutting through the darkness as he entered. Inside, the air felt even colder, the silence more smothering. His breath lightly echoed off the stone walls. The bear came in behind him, its solid presence reassuring in the pitch black. It brushed past him, its movements deliberate despite its injury. Vincent watched as it made its way to a dim corner where a small, quivering form was nestled against the rocks. It took a moment for his eyes to adapt to the dark, but once they did, his breath hitched. There, two tiny cubs, little more than tufts of fur, clung to the icy rock. Their small frames quaked with each frail breath, their eyes barely open from fatigue. "Oh my God," Vincent murmured. He sank to his knees, the flashlight shaking in his grasp as he beheld the cubs. The mother bear looked his way, her large head dipping as if she understood his exclamation. She then gently nudged one of the cubs with her nose, softly brushing its delicate body. Vincent's throat tightened, emotion swelling. He had spent years documenting such raw, wild beauty through his camera lens, capturing scenes that spoke silently but profoundly. Yet this moment demanded more than a snapshot. It called for action. Cautiously, he extended his gloved hand, touching the fur of the nearest cub. It was chillingly cold. "They won't make it out here," he whispered, his voice a strained whisper. "Not like this." The mother bear issued a soft rumble, a sound that vibrated off the cave walls, not a growl, but a deeper, trusting resonance. Vincent made up his mind. He gently lifted one cub, holding its frail body against his chest. The other cub weakly clawed at his coat as he picked it up too. "We're going back to the cabin," he announced, looking at the mother bear. "All of us." As he moved back into the dwindling daylight of the ravine, cradling the cubs protectively, the mother bear trailed closely behind. For the first time in years, Vincent felt a resurgence of purpose, a sense he had thought drowned in his own sorrow. The return to the cabin was laborious and slow, the snow deepening as daylight dwindled. Vincent clutched the two cubs tightly to his chest, feeling their frail bodies quiver against his thick parka. Each step grew more burdensome, his boots plunging into the frozen snow that covered the forest floor. The mother bear, a quiet giant, trudged behind him, her form a dim silhouette in the failing light. The wind picked up, its cold bite piercing through even the heaviest layers. Vincent tightened his hold on the cubs, his arms sore yet firm. "Hang on, little ones," he whispered, his breath visible in the icy air. "We're almost there." The cabin emerged as a welcoming sight amidst the trees, its windows casting a warm glow into the encroaching darkness. A wave of relief washed over Vincent as they neared, his heart thumping from both fatigue and resolve. He reached the porch and gently opened the door, the cabin's warmth enveloping him like a comforting hug. The mother bear paused at the threshold, her large silhouette framing the night. Vincent faced her, his voice calm and reassuring. "Come on," he coaxed. "It's safe here." She entered hesitantly, her claws making a gentle clicking noise on the wooden floor. Her breaths, slow and visible, misted in the air as she sniffed around, her eyes scanning the cozy interior. Vincent secured the door behind her, isolating them from the escalating chill and the storm that was brewing outside. He carefully placed the cubs on a folded blanket by the wood stove, their little forms instinctively curling towards the heat. Kneeling beside them, he gently examined each cub for injuries. A soft whimper escaped one of the cubs, pulling at his heartstrings. "They're so cold," he murmured, eyeing the stove. He added another log to the fire and the flames leapt up, crackling with renewed vigor and brightness. The mother bear settled nearby, her eyes lingering on her cubs with a look that conveyed a profound blend of trust and hope, stirring a tightness in Vincent's throat. He grabbed an old quilt from the back of a chair and carefully wrapped it around the cubs. As the quilt enveloped them, their shivering eased and their breathing steadied, warmed by the gentle heat. "There you go," Vincent whispered soothingly. "You're safe now." The mother bear responded with a soft rumble, her head sinking to the floor. Vincent looked at her, his heart heavy with empathy for her evident weariness. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" he murmured, his voice a hushed thread. Time passed quietly in the cabin, filled only with the crackle of the fire and the occasional stirring of the bears. Vincent alternated between caring for the cubs and preparing a modest meal for himself of canned soup and crackers. His eyes often returned to the mother bear, touched by the unexpected bond they had formed. When the cubs eventually awoke, sniffing the air at the smell of food, relief washed over Vincent. He opened a can of salmon and placed it on a shallow dish. The mother bear gently pushed the dish towards her cubs, observing as they took small, cautious bites. Leaning against the counter, Vincent allowed a subtle smile to creep across his face. For the first time in a long while, the cabin felt full. The bear's silent, enduring presence brought a vitality to the space, filling a void in Vincent's life he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. As dusk settled, Vincent found himself beside the fire, his thoughts adrift like the sparks that fluttered upward from the flames. The day's events seemed almost dreamlike, a narrative that might have spun out during one of those quiet nights when the silence overwhelmed him. He looked over at the mother bear, now curled protectively around her cubs. Her breaths were deep and even, her eyes shut in what appeared to be the deepest sleep she'd enjoyed in days. A surge of respect washed over Vincent for her resilience, her fierce commitment to safeguard her cubs against the direst circumstances. "You remind me of someone," he murmured to her, his voice lost in the fire's crackle. His thoughts drifted to memories he had long suppressed of his wife, Claire, and their daughter, Sophie. Claire had possessed a formidable tenacity, always shielding her loved ones with a steady determination. Vincent's heart clenched as he remembered Sophie's laughter, once echoing through every room, filling their home with light and warmth. That joy had been absent from the cabin for too long, and he had almost resigned himself to its absence. Yet, watching the cubs nestle closer to their mother, a spark of something long dormant stirred within him: hope. As the night thickened, the forest quieted, the storm's clamor diminishing to a muted rustle. Vincent remained seated by the fire, his camera idle on his lap. Despite the scene before him being a dream for any wildlife photographer, he felt it inappropriate to document the bear's exposed state through his lens. Instead, he chose to simply observe. The mother bear's breaths formed a tranquil cadence, her cubs tucked snugly by her side. The flickering firelight cast their figures in warm shades of gold and amber, creating a live portrait more poignant than any photograph could convey. This image, etched in his memory, would stand as a lasting symbol of the profound beauty that can arise in the most unforgiving winters. As he drifted into sleep, Vincent murmured into the stillness, a confession meant only for himself. "You saved them, and perhaps they're saving me too." The cabin grew quiet, the fire's warmth holding back the chill of the outside world. For the first time in many years, Vincent found himself falling asleep with a feeling of tranquility, secure in the knowledge that within these fragile walls they were protected, for the moment. Dawn's light seeped through the frosted glass of the windows, drawing weak lines on the wooden floor. This early, the cabin was usually quiet and deserted, but today it buzzed gently with new life. Underneath the quilt, the cubs moved slightly, their small paws twitching as they snuggled closer together. Their mother lay nearby, her breathing deep and regular. At the kitchen table, Vincent cradled a hot cup of coffee. The steam rose in spirals, catching the dim morning light before disappearing. His hands, clasping the warm mug, shook slightly, not from cold, but from the enormity of the challenges that lay ahead. He looked over at the bears, their presence infusing the room with a vitality he hadn't experienced in years. The mother bear's fur was starting to dry, shedding the icy crust that had adorned her the previous evening. The cubs, though fragile, appeared more robust, breathing more steadily. However, the stark truth lingered. Their haven was only temporary. Vincent stood up and walked over to the wood stove, placing another log onto the flames. The fire surged up, filling the cabin with a comforting radiance. He knelt by the stove, lost in thought as he gazed into the flickering flames. "I can't keep you here," he whispered, his words more for himself than for the bears. "You need to return to where you belong." The thought of releasing them back into the wild unsettled him. His years of documenting nature's relentless cycles of survival and demise weighed heavily on him. These bears had already survived so much. Could they withstand even more? The mother bear shifted, her ears picking up on his concern. She raised her head, locking eyes with him. Her amber eyes conveyed a quiet strength, a reassurance that she was no stranger to the wild's challenges and could face them again. Throughout the day, Vincent was busy with preparations. He collected supplies, dried fish, jerky, and an old tarp he repurposed into a makeshift sled. The mother bear observed his every move with a keen interest, tilting her head slightly as if grasping his plan. The cubs, now livelier, cautiously explored the cabin's periphery. Watching one of the cubs tug at a stray thread on the quilt brought a smile to Vincent's face. The sibling joined in, its small growls of effort softly filling the cabin. "Troublemakers," Vincent chuckled, the sound of his laughter startling him as it pierced the solemn silence that had enveloped the cabin for the past 2 years. He squatted down and extended his hand, palm up. The smaller cub paused, then cautiously approached, its nose quivering as it sniffed at his hand. Vincent's smile grew as the cub nudged his hand gently, its soft fur brushing against his skin. "You've got some fight in you, don't you?" he murmured softly. "Good. You're going to need it." By the middle of the afternoon, the sled was prepared. Vincent had padded it with blankets to provide a comfortable resting area for the cubs during their journey. He secured the tarp tightly, double-checking the knots to make sure they were reliable. The mother bear, perceiving the change in the air, edged closer, her injured paw scraping against the floor. Vincent knelt beside her, placing his hands on his knees. "It's going to be a long walk," he told her, locking eyes with her, "but I'll get you there, I promise." She responded with a soft growl, her gaze steady and unwavering. Vincent felt a surge of respect for her resilience, the kind that is forged through enduring trials and never yielding. Their initial steps back into the wild were cautious and measured. Vincent trailed the sled behind him, with the cubs snug inside, their small faces peeking out from beneath the blankets. The mother bear kept pace beside him, her stride uneven yet resolute. The snow had compacted under the weak winter sun, easing their movement somewhat. The forest around them seemed less hostile than it had the previous night. The trees rose majestically, their boughs laden with snow, casting a silent spell around them. The air was sharp, tinged with the subtle aroma of pine. Earth. For the first time in a great while, Vincent felt a profound sense of purpose with each step forward. They progressed in near silence, the only sounds being the crisp crunch of snow beneath their feet and the occasional rustle of branches swayed by the wind. As they moved, Vincent's mind drifted, summoning memories unexpectedly. He reminisced about CLA and Sophie and the laughter that once permeated their home. He recalled the accident, the overwhelming grief that had herded him into this secluded existence. However, as he walked alongside the bears, he sensed a subtle shift within himself. It wasn't an epiphany or a striking moment of clarity, it was more understated, a gradual realization that life, even in its most severe trials, continued to offer moments of connection and hope. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, they arrived at a clearing near a frozen stream. Vincent halted, his breath visible in the chilly air, surrounded by a ring of trees whose branches created a natural shelter against the wind. The clearing seemed ideal. "This might be a good spot," he suggested, looking to the mother bear for approval. She sniffed the air, her ears alert as she assessed the surroundings. Appearing content, she nudged the sled softly, her eyes fixed tenderly on her cubs. Vincent untied the sled and gently lifted the cubs onto the snow. They stretched and explored their new environment, their tiny paws marking the snow with delicate prints. The mother bear settled beside them, wrapping herself protectively around her young. Vincent stepped back, his heart constricting as he observed them. This was what they needed, an opportunity to heal, to grow, and to reclaim their rightful place in the wild. Yet, the prospect of leaving them in this setting brought on a peculiar sense of loss. "You're going to be okay," he murmured, his voice faltering a bit. "You're strong, stronger than I'll ever be." The mother bear raised her head, her gaze locking with his one final time. It was a look filled with understanding, gratitude, and perhaps even a goodbye. Vincent nodded, his throat tightening as he turned to depart. The return to the cabin was solitary, the emptiness of the sled a stark reminder of the life he had just parted with. Yet, as he made his way through the snow, a serene peace enveloped him. He had done all he could, provided them a chance, and through this act, he had rediscovered a part of himself he thought was lost forever. As the cabin appeared, bathed in a soft, flickering golden glow from between the trees, Vincent stepped through the door, immediately enveloped by the warmth emanating from the fire. It welcomed him, as would a long-lost companion. Settling beside the stove, he held his camera and gazed into the flames, feeling for the first time in many years a sense of companionship. In the ensuing days, a peculiar calm settled over him. The cabin grew quieter, more solitary, with the absence of the bears creating a haunting silence in his daily life. Each morning, Vincent awoke before the sun, brewed his coffee, and took his usual seat at the modest wooden table by the window. He looked out over the snow-draped forest where the once distinct tracks of the bear family had disappeared under new layers of snow. Thoughts of them lingered in his mind. Were they safe? Had the cubs grown stronger? Did the mother bear maintain her resilience? Often he found himself gazing into the woods, lost in thought, searching for any sign of life, even though he knew the likelihood of their return was slim. He gently placed his coffee mug down, the soft clink disrupting the stillness of the room. Although the cabin was warm, with the hum of the wood stove filling the air, a chill lingered within him. Memories of the bears persisted, those delicate, ephemeral moments when the cabin had buzzed with their soft movements, their presence warming spaces that had been empty for far too long. That afternoon, Vincent headed outside, his bright camera slung over his shoulder. The storm had subsided, leaving a crystal-clear landscape that shimmered under the weak winter sunlight. The forest lay under a blanket of untouched snow, the trees coated with frost that sparkled like broken glass. He moved slowly, the crunch of his boots breaking the silence, the crisp air stinging his cheeks. He hadn't used the camera since the bears had been around, and holding it again felt unusual, almost alien. For years, photography had been his refuge, the lens acting as a shield between him and the world, allowing him to observe without participation, to document life without fully living it. But now, the camera seemed heavier, its purpose more ambiguous. Vincent paused near the frozen stream where he had last seen the bears. The clearing was silent, undisturbed except for the faint outlines of his previous footprints. He stood motionless for a long while, the camera dangling by his side. The forest seemed to pause, its quietude weighing heavily upon him. He lifted the camera slowly, the viewfinder capturing the snow-draped trees and the stream shimmering subtly in the sunlight. Yet, as he poised to press the shutter, his hand hesitated. The scene, though picturesque, felt hollow. It lacked the vitality, the narrative, that had imbued this spot just days earlier. Vincent lowered the camera, letting it hang against his chest. A deep sigh left him, his breath forming a cloud in the freezing air. He realized then that it wasn't merely an image he sought to capture, it was the memory, the bond he had formed with the bears. They had transcended being mere subjects of his photography. They had woven themselves into the fabric of his narrative, epitomizing the ephemeral yet profound connections possible under the most severe conditions. As he began to turn away, a subtle sound halted him. It was soft, nearly inaudible, but distinct, the gentle crunch of snow. His heart rate quickened as he scanned the trees, looking for any sign of movement. For a brief instant, he thought he spotted a shadow darting through the pines, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Is someone there?" he called, his voice carrying across the silence. No reply came, only the soft rustle of the wind through the branches. Vincent remained still, his breath suspended. The sound had been real. He was sure of it, but its source had now disappeared. His return to the cabin was slower, the atmosphere laden with a palpable sense of expectation. Though he couldn't pinpoint why, the forest seemed altered, as if concealing a secret just beyond his grasp. This sensation stayed with him, gently nagging at the back of his mind. Upon his return, the warm glow of the wood stove welcomed Vincent back into the cabin, casting elongated shadows across the floorboards. He placed the camera on the table and settled into his chair, gazing into the flickering flames. The heat soothed his sore muscles, yet his mind was anything but calm, haunted by the sounds he had heard near the stream that evening. That night, Vincent dreamed vividly of the bears. The mother bear stood at the forest's edge, her eyes reflecting a complex mix of sorrow and determination. The cubs clung to her, their small forms shivering in the chill. In his dream, she turned to him, her gaze intense and penetrating the darkness. Her eyes seemed to convey an urgent, unspoken message, but just as he was on the cusp of understanding, the vision dissolved, leaving him enveloped in emptiness. He awoke abruptly, heart racing in the quiet of the cabin. The fire had dwindled to low embers, barely illuminating the room. Sitting up, he ran a hand through his hair, trying to dispel the lingering effects of the dream, yet the image of the mother bear's deep amber eyes remained imprinted in his memory. Vincent got up and placed another log on the fire, watching the flames eagerly consume the new fuel. The dream had seemed more than mere imagination. It felt like a summons, a signal that his bond with the bears was still intact, even though their physical paths had separated. As the first light of dawn painted the sky, Vincent stood by the window, gazing out at the snow-blanketed forest. The horizon was brushed with soft pinks and golds, the kind of scene that had once driven him to take up photography. But on this morning, he didn't reach for his Nikon. Instead, he simply observed, allowing the silence to permeate the voids within him. In that moment, he made a vow, not just to the bears, but to himself as well. He resolved to honor their narrative not through his photographs but through his deeds. He committed to safeguarding this delicate swath of wilderness that had enriched him profoundly. Maybe, in this endeavor, he would rediscover the path to the life he had once set aside. The sounds of their presence might diminish, but the memory of their shared moments would endure, a gentle nudge of the connections that can blossom in the most surprising of circumstances. Weeks turned into months, and the harsh grip of winter began to ease on the valley. The receding snow unveiled earthy patches and the bare bones of last season's leaves. Although the air retained a bite, it now hinted at spring, whispering of rebirth and transformation. Vincent's daily life stayed simple, chopping wood, maintaining the generator, and cooking meals. Yet, internally, he had transformed. The cabin, once his shelter from the outside, now seemed like a chapter in a grander tale, one that stretched beyond its wooden confines into the embracing woods. On a crisp morning, as Vincent was gearing up for a walk in the woods with his camera, a sudden movement caught his eye through the window. A dark figure emerged from the tree line, a familiar, heavy-set shape that made his heart skip a beat. It was the mother bear, pausing at the edge of the clearing, her posture noble as she looked toward the cabin. Her coat, previously dull and worn, now shimmered healthily, and her once injured paw, though still a bit rigid, supported her weight comfortably. Behind her, two smaller forms frolicked in and out of view. The cubs, their vitality and playfulness evident. Vincent's emotions surged as he stepped outside, his boots making soft impressions in the snow. He maintained a respectful distance, careful not to encroach on their space. The mother bear regarded him, her amber eyes reflecting a composed assurance. For a brief interval they simply observed each other, united by their past interactions. Vincent lifted his hand in a gentle wave, a mute salute to the connection they had established. In response, the mother bear emitted a low, soothing grunt, holding his gaze momentarily before she turned to lead her cubs back into the woods. The young bears scampered behind her, their paw prints intertwining in the snow. Vincent watched them vanish into the forest, his heart filled with a bittersweet joy. He understood this was their rightful place, returning to the wild where they thrived. The sight of them, robust and flourishing, instilled in him a profound sense of quiet pride. As the sun set, Vincent settled by the wood stove, his notebook open in front of him. Its pages were filled with sketches and notes, a catalogue of observations collected over the years. Yet this evening, he embarked on a fresh endeavor. The first word he penned was bears, selected with deliberation. He wrote, "This winter, a mother bear and her cubs found their way to my door, and in helping them, I found my way back to myself." The words flowed effortlessly, a cascade of thoughts and memories spilling onto the page. He recounted the storm, the nascent trust that developed between them, and their journey to the frozen stream. He described the tranquil moments by the fire, with the cubs nestled under the quilt, and how the mother bear's gaze seemed to convey profound, unvoiced truths. For the first time in years, Vincent felt a purpose that transcended mere survival. His narrative was not only about the bears but about resilience, connection, and how life, in its unexpected turns, can mend even the deepest scars. With the arrival of spring, the valley burst into life, filled with the melodies of birds and the soft buzz of bees. The once barren forest now teemed with wildflowers and lush greenery. Vincent spent more time outdoors, his camera at the ready, documenting the landscape's metamorphosis. One afternoon, drawn to the clearing where he had last seen the bears, he found the snow gone, replaced by soft grass and patches of moss. He stood there, heart swelling, as he pictured the bears roaming the woods, liberated and unbound. Placing his camera aside, he closed his eyes and let the symphony of the wilderness envelop him. The whisper of leaves, a distant bird's call, the gentle babble of the stream. Each sound seemed to reaffirm the enduring message that life indeed moves forward. The cabin, once a haven of solitude, had transformed into a refuge, not only for the bears but for Vincent as well. He still bore the weight of his past, yet it burdened him less now. The memories of Claire and Sophie, which had once served as painful reminders of his losses, now interwove into his life's ongoing narrative, becoming integral parts of a continuously unfolding story. One evening, as the horizon blazed with gold and lavender, Vincent sat on the porch with his journal on his lap. Its pages were filled with sketches and words that captured the unforgettable winter. He turned to a fresh page and began to write. We are all intertwined in ways that may forever elude our full understanding. By aiding a mother bear and her cubs, I rediscovered something I feared was irrevocably lost, a reason to hope, a reason to heal. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, he closed his journal and gazed out at the forest, a subtle smile touching his lips. For the first time in many years, he felt equipped to meet the future, not as a man defined by his losses, but as one who had found anew the profound joys of connection and resilience. And as the first stars twinkled in the evening sky, he murmured a vow into the night, letting it ride the breeze. Thank you. Through the starkness of winter and a connection formed between man and beast, we've experienced a narrative of resilience, trust, and the profound impact of kindness. Sometimes it's the most unexpected meetings that lead to the most significant changes. Vincent believed he was there to save the bears, but in the end, it might have been the bears who saved him. If this story resonated with you, please let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who appreciates a moving tale, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button to join us for more inspiring stories. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the next story.